What's on your radar, Ryan?
So we reported last week on a major new development in the Julian Assange case, and the response to that report made me realize that there's a lot of confusion in the public about what he's being charged with and with what evidence. With a 24/7 news cycle, it's impossible to follow every incremental detail, and it's easy to get lost. And too often, the press doesn't step back to remind people what the context of each new development is. If you have friends or family that have given up trying to understand what's going on with the Assange case, this segment is for them. So here it goes. In 2010 and 2011, in conjunction with major papers around the world, WikiLeaks published documents and videos related to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, evidence of war crimes, and other documents that exposed corruption on a grand scale. So much so that the disclosures helped trigger the Arab Spring, popular revolts against dictators across the Mideast and North Africa. The Obama administration considered prosecuting Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, but decided they couldn't overcome, quote, the New York Times problem, which meant they couldn't figure out how to prosecute him, but not the Times. Prosecutors for the Trump administration weren't so concerned about the failing New York Times, and they went ahead and indicted him, seeking his extradition from the UK. They've repeatedly introduced longer and longer indictments trying to beef up their case, with the most recent coming in June 2020. The U.S. lost its extradition attempt, with the UK judge ruling that the U.S. couldn't be trusted to treat Assange humanely. The U.S. appealed, Assange was denied bail, and he remains detained. His father and brother just concluded a tour of the U.S., hoping to raise awareness of his plight. So what about that indictment? What is Assange actually charged with? Let's take a run through it. As the saying goes, everybody is entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. So here are the facts. The indictment begins by quoting WikiLeaks' own website to say that, quote, WikiLeaks' website explicitly solicited censored, otherwise restricted, and classified materials. As the website stated, WikiLeaks accepts classified, censored, or otherwise restricted material or political, diplomatic, or ethical significance. The indictment then goes on to note that Assange spoke at 2 hacker conferences in 2009 and encouraged hackers there to obtain information of public interest and share it with the public via WikiLeaks. The goal here is for the DOJ to show that Assange didn't just encourage hacking generally, but he specifically directed hackers going after particular targets, and indeed was a hacker himself. So let's see if they make their case. The indictment then pivots to Chelsea Manning, and it says that in 2009, using her top-secret security clearance, she began searching through classified information systems for evidence of U.S. war crimes, torture, and abuse, specifically searching for videos of torture sessions and information on detainees held at Guantanamo Bay. The insinuation people pick up that Assange is being prosecuted for publishing Clinton campaign emails leaked by Russia is simply false. It's really about the Manning leaks. We'll post a link to the indictment itself in the notes on this video on YouTube. If you're watching it somewhere other than YouTube, and no shame in that, you can also find it just by Googling. So the indictment says that from January 2010 to May 2010, Manning downloaded, quote, approximately 90,000 Afghanistan war-related significant activity reports, 400,000 Iraq war-related significant activity reports, 800 Guantanamo Bay detainee 5 assessment briefs, and 250,000 U.S. Department of State cables. That the U.S. classification system allowed her to continue downloading those documents for 5 months undetected suggests that the U.S. didn't actually care about protecting its secrets as much as it claims to. Either way, the indictment now moves to its key claim, that Assange was collaborating with Manning because he was eager to get the scoops she was offering. When she told him that she was sending him info on Guantanamo, the indictment says that Assange responded, quote, okay, great. When Manning brought up another database Assange was interested in, Assange replied, quote, that's something we want to mine entirely, by the way. None of this is unusual. If a source tells you they have information that's relevant to the public, the normal response as a reporter is to say, wonderful, thank you, that's great. Classification is the government's problem, not the media's. Whether that information can be responsibly published is a question that comes later, but the first job is to obtain it. So after Manning sent the information, she told Assange that was all she had. That's when prosecutors come with what they think is a dagger. Assange told Manning, quote, Curious eyes never run dry in my experience. Are you serious? That's what the US government has to base its claim that Assange was part of a hacker cell with Manning? Curious eyes never run dry? And that is simply a statement of fact. They're trying to indict a wink and a nod when no such wink and nod was even needed. Manning knew Assange was a journalist, and no journalist is ever satisfied with what they have. We always want more. The public and the spirit of a free press demands nothing less, even if governments don't like it. From there, the DOJ moves on to the claim that, quote, Assange agrees to help Manning crack a password. This is a lie. Assange did not offer to help Manning crack a password. I bet you've heard that lie repeated often. And when I say it's a lie, I mean that the DOJ knows that it's not true and knows they're lying. We know they're lying because they clarify their claim just a little bit later in the indictment. What Assange and Manning were trying to crack was a password hash, which basically means Manning wanted to keep looking for evidence of war crimes, but wanted to do so with an anonymous username. She already had complete access to any of that information, and cracking the password hash wouldn't give her any extra access to new information. Yet that's what they're implying by saying he helped her crack a password. But don't take my word for it. Here's the DOJ, just a few paragraphs after they claimed he tried to hack a password. Quote, had Assange and Manning successfully cracked the encrypted password hash, Manning may have been able to log onto computers under a username that did not belong to Manning. Such a measure would have made it more difficult for investigators to identify Manning as the source of unauthorized disclosures of classified information. Again, that's the DOJ talking. So what they're accusing Assange of is working to protect his source. Whether it's Bob Woodward meeting in a parking garage and calling his source Deep Throat, or journalists today using encrypted email or texting on Signal, source protection is central to investigative journalism. If that's an indictable offense, then any investigative journalism is a crime. From there, the indictment repeatedly references the, quote, curious eyes never run dry comment, with the DOJ truly believing they have a smoking gun here. This top section of the indictment finishes by talking about Assange publishing many of these documents. But note that the indictment somehow forgets to mention that he published them in collaboration with the New York Times, The Guardian, and Der Spiegel. Wait, so you might be thinking, hold on, that's it? That's all they've got? He asked for information of public value, got that information, and published it? And that's the crime? So just like you can sense how thin their case is, so can the DOJ. So the indictment moves immediately to a new section. This one based on information from what they call a, quote, teenager in NATO country 1. The man they're referring to is Siggy Thordarson, and the indictment says in early 2010 he brought Assange data that he'd hacked from a bank in Iceland. The indictment claims that Assange instructed Thordarson to hack into Icelandic systems to obtain recorded phone calls of top officials and Icelandic MPs. In an interview published June 26 in the Iceland news outlet Stundin, Thordarson said that that claim was a lie. He already had audio recordings, asked Assange if he wanted them, and of course, Assange did. At one point, the indictment also accuses Assange of using unauthorized credentials to enter into a police database in Iceland to determine whether or not the local police there were tailing him. What Siggy now says is that the credentials were his own, and he shared them with Assange. So technically, Assange, to stay within the letter of the law, should have had Siggy access it himself, since Siggy was authorized to access it. But it's a technical violation. It happened in Iceland, not the United States, and it isn't related to anything the DOJ is charging him with. It's only in there to make him sound like a hacker, when the real story is just that Siggy shared his credentials with Assange. The indictment also alleges that Thordarson created an allegiance with hackers linked to the group Anonymous, calling themselves LulzSec, asking them to hack various entities and share the data with WikiLeaks. That sounds damning, right? Except it's also a lie. This time, it's Thordarson's lie in collaboration with the DOJ. Thordarson is notoriously unreliable, but we don't have to take his word for it. Sundin obtained his chat log history from 2010 and 2011 and found that Siggy was pretending to hackers that he was a big shot at WikiLeaks, but found no evidence in all his communications that Assange knew of what he was doing. To quote the Icelandic outlet, quote, "There is no indication WikiLeaks staff had any knowledge of Thordarson's contacts with aforementioned hacking groups. Indeed, the logs show his clear deception. The communications there show a pattern where Thordarson is constantly inflating his position within WikiLeaks, describing himself as chief of staff, head of communications, number 2 in the organization, or responsible for recruits. Stundin cannot find any evidence that Thordarson was ever instructed to make those requests by anyone inside WikiLeaks," unquote. So the next section involves 2 other hackers. One of them, named Sabu, had been arrested by the FBI and had become an informant. Sabu had been in touch with Siggy. So now you can see why the FBI is so mad. Here they have Siggy, claiming to be WikiLeaks chief of staff and acting with authorization from Assange, saying all sorts of incriminating things to their FBI informant. Their problem was that Siggy was just a teenage con artist BSing to these hackers to make himself look cool. All of the evidence we have suggests Siggy didn't even have any computer skills. He had to ask the FBI how to upload a video file. In chats that Stundin obtained, he frequently has to ask people for private help with computer tasks. Sabu also talked directly with Assange, the indictment alleges, but the best he could get out of him was this. Sabu asked Assange, quote, "If you have any targets in mind, by all means, let us know," unquote. And Assange told him he couldn't, quote, "give target suggestions for the obvious legal reasons." But then Assange added, basically, do some Googling and find, quote, "people that do bad things." So in the FBI's own indictment, they have Assange explicitly telling hackers he can't direct them, but he broadly suggests they find bad people. If the prosecutors had anything better than that, trust me, they'd put it in there. Later in the indictment, the DOJ shifts to publicly known stuff. It hits him for helping Edward Snowden get from Hong Kong to Moscow, and notes that he suggested at a conference that IT administrators of conscience go work for the CIA and leak to him. Now, that's not the normal kind of thing that a New York Times reporter would say at a hacker conference, but it's his right to give that general advice. The feds eventually get to the actual counts in the indictment. Count 1 of the indictment says that he sought and obtained secret documents, which he did. But here's the scary part from a press freedom perspective. It says Assange is guilty because he sought to, quote, willfully communicate documents relating to the national defense. By communicate, the DOJ means publish. Count 2 is conspiracy to commit computer intrusions. Counts 3 through 8 and count 18 are different versions of, quote, obtaining and receiving of national defense information. Counts 9 through 17 return to publishing. This time the crime is, quote, unauthorized disclosure of national defense information. I guarantee you the New York Times or Washington Post will commit that crime multiple times by the end of this week. So that's 10 counts directly tied to publishing for a total of a 100-year sentence. Because that's completely insane and runs counter to the First Amendment, the other counts are versions of accusing Assange of being a hacker. To back that up, the DOJ has Assange trying to help Manning stay anonymous. They have him saying, "Okay, great," and they have him saying, "Curious eyes never run dry." To back all that up, they have Siggy Thordarson's testimony. Or, I should say, they used to have Siggy Thordarson's testimony. Now, they've got nothing. It's time to drop these charges and apologize, not just to Assange, but to the cause of press freedom globally. So as I was watching some of the Twitter traffic related to our segment that we did recently that people could go back and find on our site, I was seeing a lot of people that just simply had no idea what was going on. I thought it might be useful to actually just lay out for people what the charges are so they can say, no, actually, this is it. Like, this is what he's being charged with.
No, I think it's enormously useful because we're now more than 10 years past the initial sort of controversy that brewed up. And there's been obviously a lot that's happened, but there's a lot going on in the weeds. And the charges themselves are so different than the actual conversation that sort of bubbled up 10 years ago or a decade ago about the ethics of it. When you get into the charges, it is an entirely different ballgame to see what the DOJ actually has on Julian Assange. Totally different than the conversation conversation itself, I think.
And they never would have been able to charge him right in the wake of that. They, waiting 10 years helped them in a way. They charged Chelsea Manning at the time, but they didn't charge him. And so as I mentioned, his father and his brother have been on a national tour. Gabriel Shipton, in fact, who's a filmmaker and is brother of Julian Assange, is joining us now, having just wrapped up his national tour. Gabriel, what can you tell us about what the American public seems to know about the Julian Assange case?
Yeah, the people we met across the US, they understand. I mean, we spoke to thousands of people, and they understand the importance of this case and what it means to press freedoms and the First Amendment. They understand the anti-war aspects and also what it means to internet freedom as well. So I think that, out there, the people that we spoke to, there's a general, quite a concern that that the implications of this case to press freedoms.
One of the most interesting aspects I think that Brian focused on and that you just mentioned, Gabriel, is the extent that this is relevant to journalists and to the press. And I'm curious if you guys hear much from the press. I mean, do you get a lot of inquiries from some of these legacy media outlets? Because it seems to me that there's a deafening silence coming from them as it relates to this case and the charges and their relevance to people that work in media.
Well, I think in this case, you expect legacy media to act in their own interest, right? Like if they're talking about this case, outlining what these charges are about, they're protecting their own power. These charges are an attack on their freedom to publish. So it is a bit perplexing that legacy media aren't out there doing more to help people to understand what this is about and fighting for this prosecution to be stopped.
Gabriel, can you tell us a little bit about how Julian is doing? He just turned 50 the other day. Where is he being held, under what conditions, and how often are you able to communicate with him?
So Julian is in maximum security prison outside London. He's in prison with, the most dangerous, violent criminals in the UK. It's his third year in that prison. He's sort of stuck in this limbo, which is this. It's been 6 months since he won his extradition case, and we still don't know whether there will be an appeal or not. So he's, in this limbo with no, he's an innocent man. So he's on remand. He doesn't have a sentence. And that's just another abuse of process that's been leveraged against him. He's been going through, reputational attacks, attacks on his human dignity, attacks on his freedom for the past 12 years. And Nils Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, found that he was being psychological tortured. So he's basically been crushed from the inside out, and it's taking its toll on him. I saw him in October last year, just before the jail went into lockdown and they stopped visits. Seeing him over the years, you can see how he's deteriorating. And Nils Melzer called it a slow motion murder. So, it's sort of heartbreaking for me to watch. But we just do what we can, and the things that we do, like my father and I, and doing the tour, that keeps his spirits up. And visits have just started back up again, so he's been able to see his children a couple of weeks ago for the first time in 8 months. So, these little things, keep him going despite all the pressure that's being piled on top of him.
So the tour, I imagine, was aimed at energizing the public and shaping public opinion. Do you see public opinion to exert pressure on the Biden administration as the most hopeful route for your family? Is the goal to really amplify public pressure in a way that exerts pressure on the Biden administration, and then you're sort of able to see a hopeful path forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think all of these types of movements, start from the ground up. I think that's what we were in the US, trying to build that momentum. And as we moved across the country, we saw that every event that we went to, there were more and more people. We were getting more and more interest from the media, usually independent media, but some of the legacy media were wanting to talk to us about the case. So, it's just building that movement, and there is a base already there, but just getting all the groups together, connecting them, reinvigorating them, and I think we've seen the results. You're having me on your show, which is fantastic.
Gabriel, thanks for joining us. Where can people go to learn more about the case?
They can go to assangedefense.org.
Great. Well, thanks again. Thank you so much for joining us, and best of luck to you and your family.
Absolutely.
All right, great. Thanks, guys.
Much appreciated. Well, coming up, all-star panelists Michael Starr Hopkins and Inez Stepman are with us when Rising returns.